When it comes to recording, do preamps actually matter, or does any old interface and any old preamp do the job? Well, I've wondered that myself, and today we're going to put that to the test. Chogmasa Hoshifo Dale Shack. I am a recording producer and engineer in and around the Nashville area, and I often get to work in big studios with amazing world-class preamps and A to D conversion and tools, but oftentimes I'm just like everyone else working in a small room with audio interfaces that you can buy from Sweetwater or Amazon or wherever you feel like buying your equipment from. And I'm faced with the question, do the preamps that I use, do they actually matter, or is it just a name that's on the front of the box? How different are these really? I want to know the answer to that question just as much as you all do. So today I'm using 5 preamps that are really quite affordable that you can pick up and find online, on Facebook Marketplace, on eBay, on Craigslist, pawn shops, thrift stores sometimes, and just seeing what do they sound like using the exact same sources, the exact same mic placement, and the exact same microphone itself. Again, none of the preamps we're using today are expensive high-tier ones. We're not going to be looking at APIs and Neves and SSLs and whatever else. We're looking at affordable ones that you can find and implement into your home studio today for a relatively cheap price. The 5 preamps we're looking at today are 1, Audience Evo 16 interface and the preamps that come built in inside of it. I believe when we bought this interface for our podcast Successfully Unsigned and for all the live sessions we were doing, live in studio, in bedrooms, in living rooms, and various places with artists right there, that this interface was somewhere in the ballpark of $600 to $800. Comes with 8 preamps, some line outs. It's your typical kind of interface. It's audience version of kind of like the Scarlett 18i20. But the more I used it, the more I realized I was not taking advantage of the ADAT inputs and outputs that it had. ADAT, for anyone who's not familiar, is another term for optical or light pipe, sometimes it's called. It allows you through one cable that literally emits light, a little red light in it, to send audio to and from for up to 8 channels at 48K. So since I wasn't using those ADAT lines, I wanted to start incorporating that into my workflow, which is where I began building out this mobile rig, which is right next to me. Which brings us to our next set of preamps, which is the Behringer Ultra Gain Pro 8. I think that's right. Pro 8 Digital. The Pro 8 Digital is a single rack unit preamp box that comes with 8 more preamps and 8 more line outputs on the back if you're into that kind of thing. The next set of preamps that we'll talk about is Presonus's ADAT preamps, which is what they call the Digimax LT. Now it also has 8 preamps in it, but one thing I really like about it that the Behringer doesn't have is that phantom power is selectable for every channel rather than the whole block of 8 in one on and off switch. There is a pad for every preamp, which the Behringer does not have, along with the rotary knob for the actual preamp itself is smooth and gradual rather than notched like the Behringer's is. So just a few little things about how it's used that feel a little different. This is my very first time using the Presonus, so I have no idea really what it sounds like. For anyone curious, the Behringer Ultra Gain Pro 8 I've seen online for $50 for a whole set of 8 preamps, which is a really great price. And the Presonus I've seen anywhere from $70 to $150, so really not all that expensive for 8 preamps. So our 4th preamp in question is also a Behringer unit because we're talking about affordable, inexpensive preamps today. This is also part of their Ultra Gain series. It is called the Mic 100. It is a single preamp rather than 8 like we've seen previously. It is not ADAT, it is all analog, and it is a tube preamp, which makes it the only tube preamp that we're going to use and talk about today. I bought this one years ago and never really liked it, but because it's hanging around, thought we'd throw it in the mix and see how it sounds. This preamp, if I remember right, cost in the ballpark of about $100 brand new. And last but not least, we have one more kind of further out there preamp than the rest of them, and that is a preamp that's built into a Sony TC788 tape machine from the early to mid 70s. Now this particular unit is a little bit higher end than the rest, especially for its era when they came out brand new. I think they were, from what I've read online, somewhere around $1,500, which I have no idea what that would be with inflation today, but a lot of times you can find similar types of tape machines all over the place, be it Marketplace, eBay, thrift stores. I've seen them personally at thrift stores, at pawn shops, at antique stores. You can find reel-to-reel tape machines for pretty inexpensive. I've seen some for 10, 20 bucks, 50 bucks. This one might be a little higher end than some of those, but all in all, you're getting a preamp that has not probably been touched or used in the last 20, 30, 40 years, and you never know what kind of characteristics you're going to get out of it. So today, because it happens to be sitting over there, we're going to make that preamp number 5. This particular model has 4 preamps on it, but of course we're only going to use one. Now, the biggest things I'm concerned with as I'm listening to this is how does it sound on various sources? Can you match it to fit a specific type of source? Like, does one preamp work maybe a little bit better with electric guitars that are distorted versus electric guitars that are clean? Does it work better with a male vocal or a female vocal? How does the frequency response and distortion of a particular preamp make it sound different than a different preamp? We often talk about in the audio world that preamps are a lot like lenses for a camera body kind of being the microphone and the lens being the preamp. That massively changes how you look at and how you feel the image that you're looking at. So preamps can be a major influence, but how do these inexpensive ones stack up against each other? Are they going to be different? Are they going to be the same? And how can we choose one that's going to be better for a certain source over another? Now, like I said, this is purely a test of curiosity on my part with these preamps that I've never pitted against each other, and I have no idea what this outcome is going to be like. I'm going through this process just the same as you. So to test these 5 preamps, I prepared 5 sources for us to compare. For each of these, the microphone is going to be placed in the exact same location, so there's no change in placement and how that sounds. And since I don't own a multi-$1,000 reference microphone for the pristine perfection of everything, we're going to use a microphone that everyone's familiar with, an SM57. Though it itself is going to color the sound quite dramatically, what we're really paying attention to here is the differences between the preamps rather than the differences between the microphones or the position. So 57 should work just fine. These 5 sources are pre-recorded music playing out of a loudspeaker, a clean and simple guitar tone, a distorted guitar tone, a raw vocal with all of its imperfection and lack of pitch at times, and lastly, pink noise for the more scientific approach. So let's dive right in and actually start with the most technical of all, the pink noise. Now, I'm a very visual person, and I like looking at all the meters jump and all the pretty colors, so sometimes seeing a graph like this can help me understand visually what I'm hearing with my ears. This is a graph of the frequency response of each of the pink noise recordings we just heard. You'll notice that each one of the preamps is represented with a different color that you can see down below. Now, to help us, this graph has been smoothed, so it's a little easier to read, but if we wanted to peel that back and look at something a little more intricate to the actual recording, we can look at the 1/6 smoothing option, and of course one with no smoothing at all, which is kind of difficult to read, but really showcases some of the differences that are going on under the hood with these preamps and with these recordings. Now let's move on to some pre-recorded music that I'm playing out of a single live speaker, so it is in mono. First you'll hear the original track, and then you'll hear what each of them sound like through the microphone and preamp. Now, I'm not going to share graphs for every single source that we look at today, but I thought this one was really interesting for a couple things. The first thing I noticed was at the 200 hertz mark, everything above that is pretty well locked in with each other as far as frequency response is concerned. And then, interestingly, the Sony tape machine has a less steep roll-off above 10K than the others, which I really did not expect. Now, it's below that 200 hertz mark that things get really interesting. Sticking with the Sony, where it kind of peaks at that 200 hertz mark, it continues to stay relatively flat before it gets down to that 50 mark where you start to see the roll off. That's, I don't know, I don't know what to make of that. That's rather interesting. Now, there's 2 to 3 big peaks and valleys in those other preamps, which I'm going to assume, since they're all running together, that that's musical content of what was recorded. It's probably my kick drum in that range, giving it that huge boost. But the other thing that I find really interesting in this is that the 2 Behringer products at around that 50, 60 hertz mark actually go up rather than coming back down. Not sure what to make of that, but there it is. Now, one important thing to know about the last 3 types of sources is that I had to perform them each time, as I don't have a reamp box and, well, I have no way to just recreate my vocal perfectly every time. So each of these performances is slightly different, and that does impact the sound that is recorded, but I did the best that I could to try to keep them stylistically the same so there's no major variation in between the sounds you hear. Now let's take a listen to some clean electric guitars, see how that stacks up with these preamps. Up to this point, I was able to set my preamps identically for all the different sources that I listened to and recorded, and I didn't have to change the volume level. However, adding that distorted guitar really overblew that last preamp, the Sony TC788 tape machine. So I had to back it back down and re-record it if we wanted something that was actually cleanly recorded. That being said, that totally crushed preamp is actually kind of cool. For reference, here is a graph with all of the distorted electric guitars that you just listened to. This is over the entire course of the electric guitar run that I recorded, including parts that you don't hear in this particular video. However, if you want to check those out, there is a link below that you can download all these files and listen to yourself. There is a house in New Orleans. 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 They call the rising sun. 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 So, what do you think? Let me know down in the comments. I'll be honest, I'm a little surprised. I expected there to be more of a difference between these. You can feel how some of them sit differently. When you look at graphs, they're all remarkably similar. But at the end of the day, we don't don't listen with our eyes, we listen with our ears. So I do think you can tell how some feel like they sit a little higher and a little bit lower, right? The Audient seems to be maybe the clearest of all of them, but it's very close. The PreSonus may be right behind it. They're certainly slightly brighter than, for instance, the TC788, the Sony tape machine. I mean, that one has its own color. It's the furthest out there as far as style. It's the furthest out there as far as age. But even it is remarkably similar in some ways, more than I thought it would be. I mean, the only time it really showed true differences, like really blatant in your face differences, was with the pre-recorded music. You could hear that hi-hat kind of change. You could see that dynamic range shift. And then of course the dynamic range completely changing how I had to record electric guitars for the distorted guitar. But overall, these are very similar. Very, very similar. If you want to download these particular files, I'll make sure that there's a link down in the description where you can download these things, and then you can A and B them at your own time and leisure. One thing that's revealing to me is, coming into this, my expectation was that the Audient and then the PreSonus were going to be the best, and I think they do take the day slightly, depending on what you're doing. I like the warmth of that tape machine, and really the little tube preamp was not nearly as bad as I thought it was. Now, as I was doing these tests, some joint inside of it is a little janky, and it was doing some weird popping at times, and I had to give a little, concussion therapy to get it to act right. When it worked fine. Now, none of these would I pit up against, world-class preamps, again, going back to the APIs and the news, but that's not been our purpose today. Our purpose has been to compare what these sound like amongst each other, and I've realized that they're all remarkably similar, and if these were the only preamps that I had access to, I'd be happy using any of them in comparison to each other. They're all close enough that I wouldn't particularly be snobby about one and be gloating and raving about another. And I liked the Audient coming into it in times that I've used it in the past, and expected to not really like some of the Behringer stuff. But as close as they were, they work. They work. I'm no longer going to turn my nose up at times for some of this stuff. If this is what I have access to, all of them work fine and seem to be able to do the job that you need them to do. Now, if you disagree with me, I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear why you disagree, what you disagree about. Let me know down in the comments. As always, if you will, do me a big favor and hit subscribe, like this video, share this video with your friends if you find this result kind of surprising like I did. And then, of course, thank you for watching as well. I really appreciate everyone who spends the time here on my channel with me. And so, till next time, it's been Dale Shack. Thanks.